I thought I was just renting a room, until my landlady and her best friend looked at me and said, "You're exactly what we need." When I first arrived at the house, I expected nothing more than a quiet place to live. I was tired from hauling boxes and a little nervous about meeting the woman who owned the place. Renting from someone older felt like stepping into their world, and I wasn't sure what kind of welcome I'd get. But the moment the door opened, my doubts began to shift. She stood there, my landlady, with a calm grace that made the doorway feel like an entrance into something softer than I expected. She was in her early 40s, hair neatly pulled back, eyes carrying a warmth that was steady rather than overwhelming. Her smile was the kind that didn't try too hard, but left you with the sense you could trust it. "Come in," she said, her voice gentle, carrying a quiet authority. I stepped inside and immediately caught the scent of coffee. Rich, inviting, still fresh in the air. That's when I realized she wasn't alone. Sitting at the kitchen counter was another woman, close to the same age, but carrying herself in a completely different way. Where my landlady was composed, her friend radiated ease and playfulness. She leaned her elbow on the counter, chin resting on her hand, studying me with a sparkle of amusement in her eyes. "So this is him," the friend said, as if I'd already been a topic of discussion. Her voice was teasing, almost musical, and I felt my pulse quicken under her attention. The landlady handed me the keys, and when our fingers brushed, I noticed how warm her hand felt against mine. A brief contact, but enough to make me acutely aware of her presence. The friend tilted her head, still smiling, and asked me a string of questions. Where I was from, what I studied, if I liked the neighborhood so far. Her tone was light, but her eyes lingered, waiting for my answers with more than casual interest. Their energy together was disarming. They moved around each other like they had done it for years, one pouring coffee, the other setting a plate of biscuits on the counter, yet I felt them both quietly directing their focus toward me. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, more like stepping under a spotlight I hadn't expected. At one point, the landlady rested her hand lightly on my arm as she guided me toward the dining room to show me the space. It was a small gesture, entirely natural, but it left me hyper-aware of the warmth of her skin against mine. Her friend followed us, close enough that I could feel the brush of her sleeve against my shoulder when she leaned in to comment on the artwork on the wall. It was only the first meeting, but already I sensed there was something unusual about this arrangement. The way they studied me, not with suspicion but with quiet curiosity, made me feel like I wasn't just a tenant moving into a house. I was someone who had somehow stepped into the middle of their story. And though I couldn't explain why, I had the strong sense that my presence in their lives meant more than either of them had yet said aloud. Later that week, when I came home from classes, I found the two of them in the kitchen again. The landlady was stirring something on the stove, her sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows, while her friend leaned against the counter sipping tea. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, rich and comforting, and I realized I had walked into a moment that felt more like family than formality. "You're just in time," the landlady said, glancing over her shoulder at me. Her voice carried that same steady warmth, the kind that invited trust without effort. "We were about to eat. You should join us." I started to protest, mumbling something about not wanting to intrude, but her friend cut me off with a grin. "Oh, nonsense. It's tradition. She insists on feeding anyone who moves into her house. And besides," she set her cup down and gave me a mischievous look, "we want to get to know you properly." There was no real way to refuse. A moment later, I found myself at their small dining table, a place already set out for me as if they had expected I'd give in. Dinner was simple: roasted vegetables, bread still warm from the oven, and pasta that carried the scent of olive oil and basil. Yet it was the conversation, more than the food, that pulled me in. They asked about my studies, my family, what had brought me here. The landlady listened with quiet attentiveness, nodding at my answers, her eyes holding mine with a steady patience that made me want to say more than I usually did. Her friend was the opposite, quick to laugh, playful in her interruptions, nudging me with her elbow when I said something she found amusing. At one point, when I mentioned struggling with cooking on my own, She leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Don't worry. Between the two of us, you'll never go hungry here." The way she said it made the landlady smile softly, as though they shared an inside joke. As the evening went on, I became aware of their balance. Two women who knew each other deeply, yet seemed to open a space for me between them. The landlady's steady kindness was grounding, while her friend's boldness drew me out of myself. They were different, yet somehow their attention worked together, like two notes in harmony. When I reached for the water jug, the landlady's hand brushed against mine as she passed it across the table. It was brief, but the warmth of her touch lingered. A few minutes later, the friend leaned so close to tell me a story that I caught the faint scent of her perfume. Something floral, light, and distracting in a way that made it hard to focus on the words. The laughter came easily, yet beneath it I could sense something else. A weight in their glances when they looked at me a beat too long. A silence that fell now and then, not uncomfortable, but thick with something unspoken. By the time I helped carry the dishes back to the kitchen, I realized that dinner had been more than a welcome. It had been an invitation into a rhythm, a closeness, that already felt different from anything I had known before. After dinner, I offered to help with the cleanup, half expecting them to refuse. But the landlady handed me a stack of plates with a small, grateful smile, and before long the three of us were moving quietly around the kitchen together. The mood had shifted from playful to something gentler, quieter, as if the laughter from earlier had given way to a different kind of closeness. I stood at the sink, rinsing plates, while the landlady dried them at my side. The soft sound of running water filled the space, and I caught the faint fragrance of her hand cream each time she brushed past me. For a while, we worked in silence, and then, almost as if she hadn't meant to, she spoke. "It's been quieter around here since my son left for university," she said, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the plate she was drying. "I thought I'd enjoy the space, but the house feels a little too empty sometimes." Her words carried a weight I hadn't expected. I looked at her, wanting to say something comforting, but she gave a small shrug and smiled quickly, as if trying to soften her own admission. Still, the truth hung there between us. I wanted to tell her that I understood loneliness, even if mine came from a different place. But before I could, her friend appeared behind us with another dish in hand. She set it down with a light laugh, though her eyes didn't carry the same playfulness as before. "You know," she said, leaning against the counter, "we both pretend like we're fine with everything changing, but it gets harder the older we get. People look past us sometimes, like we've already had our turn." There was a quiet ache in her voice that caught me off guard. She masked it with a crooked smile, but I could see the vulnerability underneath. The way her hand lingered on the counter, fingers tapping softly, betrayed the nerves she tried to hide. I dried my hands and met her gaze, not with pity but with the kind of respect I hoped she could feel. "I don't see that," I said honestly. "Not at all." Something in her eyes softened, and for the first time since I'd met her, her teasing edge slipped away completely. She held my gaze a little too long, then looked down, almost shy. The landlady reached for another dish, her hand brushing mine as she did. It wasn't intentional, but neither of us pulled away right away. The warmth of her touch seemed to echo everything left unsaid in that moment. Between the quiet confessions and the fleeting touches, I realized this wasn't just about being welcomed into their home. It was about being welcomed into parts of themselves they rarely shared, vulnerabilities they usually kept hidden. And though the evening ended with nothing more than polite goodnights, I carried their words with me. Words that hinted at needs and emotions far deeper than I'd expected to find when I first stepped into their house. The rain started just after dusk, sudden and heavy, drumming against the windows like 100 quiet knocks. I had been in my room reading when the power flickered and went out, leaving the house swallowed in a muted darkness. A moment later, I heard the landlady call softly down the hall, her voice carrying calm reassurance even in the dark. "We keep candles in the kitchen. Come join us." When I walked in, the room glowed with small flames, 4 or 5 candles spread across the counter and table, their light bending shadows across the walls. The landlady was lighting another, her face briefly illuminated in a soft halo as the flame caught. Her best friend was already seated at the table, her chin resting in her palm, eyes flicking up at me with an expression that seemed both amused and inviting. "Perfect timing," she said. "We were just saying it's nicer like this. Feels like a secret world." I sat down across from them, and for a moment, none of us spoke. The rain filled the silence, steady and rhythmic, cocooning the house in a sound that felt almost protective. The landlady slid a blanket across the table, the kind of gesture that was practical but also undeniably tender. When I draped it over my shoulders, her hand lingered for a second on the fabric, adjusting it as though she wanted to be sure I was warm enough. We talked quietly in that golden half-light, about little things, memories from their pasts, even silly stories from when they first became friends. Their laughter was softer than usual, muted by the intimacy of the moment. Yet every glance, every brush of movement, felt weighted. At one point, the friend leaned forward, her eyes glimmering in the candlelight. "Do you know what we decided?" she asked, her tone half teasing, half serious. I shook my head, curious. "That you're exactly what we need," she said, her smile widening. The landlady chuckled softly beside her, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at me with that calm, steady warmth again, and added, "It's true. You've only been here a short while, but the house already feels different, lighter, better." The words landed with more weight than I expected. I felt my chest tighten, unsure how to respond. It wasn't just gratitude they were offering. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name yet. The friend's hand brushed mine briefly as she reached for her cup, her touch deliberate enough that I knew it wasn't accidental. My pulse jumped at the contact, and when I glanced up, she was watching me with an expression that dared me to acknowledge it. The landlady's eyes caught mine at the same time, but hers held something quieter, a steadiness that seemed to say, "Don't be afraid of this." For a moment, I felt suspended in that candlelit room, caught between two gazes, two presences, two women who seemed to see me in ways I wasn't used to being seen. And though nothing more was said, the phrase, "exactly what we need," echoed through me long after the candles burned lower and the storm pressed on outside. The storm passed by morning, but something had shifted in me that night. Their words, "You're exactly what we need," echoed long after the candles were blown out. It wasn't something I could brush off as casual. It lingered like warmth against the skin, even when the room had grown cold. A few days later, I found myself in the living room with both of them again. The landlady had set out tea, her steady hands moving with the same grace I was beginning to expect from her. Her best friend, meanwhile, lounged comfortably on the couch, her energy filling the room as if she owned it as much as the landlady did. "Sit," she said, patting the cushion beside her with a mischievous smile. "I want to show you something." Curiosity nudged me forward, though I hesitated as I lowered myself into the space she had left. Her closeness was immediate, the brush of her knee against mine, the faint citrus scent of her perfume. "I read palms," she said suddenly, reaching for my hand before I could respond. Her fingers closed around mine, warm and sure, and she lifted my palm into the light. I laughed softly, caught between amusement and unease. "Do you really?" "Of course," she said, her tone playful but her eyes serious. Her fingertip began tracing the lines across my skin, slow and deliberate. Each movement sent a faint shiver up my arm. Not because I believed in fortunes, but because the touch was too careful, too lingering to be a game. "This line here," she whispered, dragging her nail along the center of my palm, "means you've got more patience than most." Her gaze flicked up to meet mine, and the look she gave me held an unspoken challenge. Across from us, the landlady sat quietly, her teacup held near her lips. She wasn't laughing at the game, nor was she scolding her friend. Instead, she watched with that same calm steadiness, her expression unreadable, though I could feel her attention as surely as I felt the friend's hand on mine. The air grew heavier, quieter, as if the house itself was listening. The friend's fingertips slid slowly toward the edge of my hand, pausing just beneath my thumb. "And this," she said softly, "means you're loyal. You don't let people down. Her words held a weight beyond fortune-telling, as though she were naming something she wanted to believe about me. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. My hand was still in hers, her thumb now resting lightly against my wrist. The beat of my pulse betrayed me, steady but quickened, and I wondered if she could feel it. The landlady set her cup down and finally spoke. "Be careful," she said gently, her eyes on her friend. "You'll make him nervous." The friend only smiled, her hand squeezing mine before finally letting go. Maybe that's the point. I sat back, breath caught somewhere between relief and disappointment. There had been no kiss, no bold confession. Just the brush of a fingertip, the weight of two women's gazes, and the undeniable truth that I was no longer just a tenant in this house. For the first time, I realized how dangerous this closeness could be. And yet, I also knew I didn't want to step away from it. The days that followed carried a quiet electricity. Every shared glance seemed to hold a weight I couldn't name, and every touch, no matter how accidental, seemed to last just a fraction longer than it should have. It was as if we were all circling something none of us dared to speak aloud. One evening, the three of us ended up in the living room again. The landlady had chosen the armchair near the window, her posture neat, calm, hands folded in her lap. Her best friend sprawled on the couch beside me, her usual ease softened by a quietness I hadn't seen before. I don't know what pushed me to break the silence, but the words came before I had time to second-guess them. "Can I ask you both something?" Two sets of eyes turned toward me, one steady, one curious. My chest tightened under their gaze, but I pressed on. Do you feel it too? This closeness, this whatever's happening between us? Because I don't want to pretend it's just me imagining it." The friend was the first to respond. She gave a small, almost relieved laugh, though her voice was softer than usual when she said, "Finally. I was wondering how long it would take you to notice." The landlady lowered her gaze briefly, then looked back at me, her expression unreadable. "We've both felt it," she admitted quietly. "But we didn't want to make you uncomfortable. You're younger and you're living under my roof. It's complicated." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to find the right words. "It is complicated, and I don't want to cross any boundaries. But the truth is, I feel drawn to you, to both of you, and I don't know what to do with that." Silence followed, heavy but not cold. The friend shifted closer, her knee brushing mine, her hand finding my shoulder in a gesture that was both playful and deeply reassuring. "You don't have to do anything," she said gently. "Just don't run from it." The landlady rose from her chair and crossed the room, her steps measured but certain. She sat on the other side of me, close enough that her presence pressed softly against my arm. Her hand rested on my shoulder, steady and grounding, while her eyes searched mine. "You've brought something into this house we didn't realize we were missing," she said, her voice low, almost trembling with the weight of her admission. "It's not about rules or age. It's about how you make us feel. Seen. Alive again." The warmth of her hand on my shoulder, the quiet confidence in her words, the gentle squeeze of her friend's hand on the other side. I felt held in a way I hadn't before. For the first time, the unspoken tension gave way to something simpler, something braver. The truth laid bare between us. And in that moment, I stopped feeling like an intruder in their world. I felt like I belonged. The honesty we had shared that evening left the air feeling different, lighter, clearer, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from all of us. For the first time since moving in, I didn't feel like a guest tiptoeing around someone else's home. I felt like I was part of it. A few nights later, the three of us found ourselves gathered again, this time with no storm, no power outage, no excuses. Just the simple comfort of choosing to be in the same space. The landlady had set a soft lamp on the table, its glow bathing the room in golden light. Her friend had brought over a bottle of wine, laughing that we had earned it after such a long week. We sat close on the couch, the three of us pressed together in a way that would have felt strange weeks ago, but now felt natural, like gravity itself had arranged us this way. The landlady on one side, her presence steady and reassuring. Her best friend on the other, lively as always, though her laughter carried a tenderness I hadn't heard before. At one point, the landlady leaned against me, her shoulder resting gently against mine. The weight of her head followed soon after, her cheek brushing my arm. I froze for a heartbeat, but then the warmth of her touch spread through me, and I let myself lean back, holding her there without words. Her friend noticed and smiled, her hand slipping quietly into mine. Her fingers wove between my own, light at first, then firm, as if she wanted to anchor the moment in place. The combination of their closeness, the gentle press of the landlady's cheek against me, the quiet strength of the friend's hand in mine, made my chest ache in a way I couldn't describe. Not with longing, not with fear, but with something fuller, something whole. The conversation that evening wasn't about heavy confessions or complicated questions. We talked about simple things: favorite books, places they wanted to travel, memories from their younger years. I listened, soaking in the rhythm of their voices, the rise and fall of their laughter, the warmth that wrapped around me as naturally as the blanket draped over our legs. What struck me most was how safe it felt. There was no rush, no expectation, just a steady sense of belonging, as though we had finally stepped into the same pace, the same quiet understanding. When the night grew late, the landlady whispered a soft goodnight and pressed her cheek briefly against my shoulder before rising. Her best friend lingered a moment longer, her thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles before she, too, stood. I remained there, the echo of their touches still warming me, realizing I had stumbled into something rare. This wasn't about chance or circumstance anymore. It was about connection, the kind that grows when people allow themselves to be vulnerable, when they let themselves need and be needed. I had thought I was only renting a room, but somehow I had found something far greater, a place in their lives and in their hearts. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?